Stevens, we can start to go.
Whenever you are, Martha, whenever you are.
I think we're pretty well. We've got a big crowd. They're still coming in, but I think in order to give us all the time, I'd like to turn it over to you, and thank you so very much for giving your time.
This is driving me crazy.
So if everyone everyone would mute.
I'm hoping there's no echo cancellation on this. I'll try to do the drum really quiet, because sometimes if you're in Zoom, it kind of shuts it right down because of the background noise. So we'll find out. If I do, just kind of do this. You can't hear me. So I am Don Stevens. I am chief of the Nulhegan Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation. And people would have known us as Nulhegan means place of the wooden traps. If anybody knows where the Nulhegan Basin is, or the Nulhegan River, that's where primarily our people are, the Nulhegan. So Nulhegan means place of the wooden traps, and Coosac means pine, and Abenaki means the first light of day. So Native people would have known us as the people who of the wooden fish traps who live in the pines who see the first light of day. So that's kind of, but we go by Nulhegan Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation. So that's what our legal name in the state. Usually when we gather, we do a gathering song. And then I will do a quick welcome song. I'll only do one stanza, so we're not doing this because some of these can get quite long. So this is a gathering song, and basically what this song does is it tells people to come and join the festivities, more or less in a nutshell. And I think there's some people that still have their mic on. Not that it matters, but I'm just letting you know. He go, he gonde, he go, he go, he gonde, he go, he go, he gonde, he go, he go. Ono dajane, he go, he gande, he go, he go, he gande, he go, he go. Ono dajane, he go, he gande, he go, he go, he gande, he go, he go, he gande, he go, he go, he gande, he kono dajane, hey yo da ho. That means amen in our language. Was that okay? Did that shut? Yeah. Great. So I am going to teach you all a song, a quick song, because when we gather, we call people in, but then we welcome other people as they come into the village. And you ever seen at a baseball game or football game when at the end of the meet, they're saying everybody lines up in a row and they touch each other's hands like, good job, great, nice to see you, good job, good job. Well, this is a song that basically is only sung, and it's basically welcoming people in the village, and it means really hello, welcome. So if you guys can say Kwano Day, so it's Kwano Day, you've learned the whole song. And it's just repeated in a different fluctuation. So I'm going to teach you your first Abenaki song, and hopefully it gets stuck in your head. And when you go to sleep tonight, you'll be playing it in your head. No, just kidding. Kwano de, Quando de, quando de. Quando de, quando de. Quando de, quando de. Quando de, 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 quando de. Quando de, quando de, quando de, quando de. Quando de, quando de, quando de, quando de, quando de, quando de. Oh, quando de, quando don he da ho. So that is a welcome greeting song. We have many of those. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson, and then I'll talk about what we've been up to, what we've accomplished, and then we can open up the floor to talk, and I can do a little show and tell of some of the things that we do or what we have done from artistry purposes. So we've been here for probably 12,000 years plus. At least that's as far back as the archaeological digs have been able to distinguish or been able to carbon date as far back as 12,000 years. We covered most of the U.S. native populations until Europeans came and the plague happened and wiped a lot of us out, which we're pretty familiar with right now with everybody going through COVID, except we didn't have vaccines or medicines or any of those things to help protect us. So it's kind of a scary repeat of history in some ways. So we lived in family bands. Like you had two types of native people. You had the people like the Iroquois who lived in big villages. Like all their people kind of lived in big villages, and they're more over in the New York side. But as you know, the more and more people that you get, the further and further you had to go out to get resources, right? Because most people would hunt everything close to them, and then they would keep moving farther and farther out to get game. Well, we were nomadic Abenaki people. We were the Western Abenaki people. And we were more nomadic. We lived in family bands. So you would have 2 or 3 families together that would live with each other. And each one of those families would be assigned a plot of area, either on a river, a pond, a lake, or someplace where they could grow crops. Our ancestors could grow crops, and we can also get the waterways were our transportation. Because we would have canoes, birch bark canoes, and we would travel up and down the rivers trading. And also for war or any other types of travel, we would live and use the waterways. And in the wintertime, we would all go to the pines to live. That's where most people, if they deer hunt, they know that a lot of deer, they hold up in the pines because there's not as much snow, and they can kind of get to the ground easier, and it's easier for them to walk. So that's where we also put our camps, were to shelter from the winter in big longhouses that we would have big family groups that we would all live together. And during those times, we would make our baskets, we would do tools, we would tell our stories, we would educate our children. And then when the spring came, we would start to move towards our summer grounds. That way, the big game like the moose, the deer, could replenish in the woods, and we would start eating fish and waterfowl and things around rivers. So it would also have time to replenish. And that's what we did for many, throughout our history. We would move between our summer and our winter grounds. We are part of let me circle back a little bit. When Europeans came to this continent, every European tries to claim wherever they are as part of their homeland, right? So in New England, on this side of the lake, the French claimed New England as New France, right? People know that in their history books. This was all considered New France to the French. It's considered Indokana to us, which means our land, but the French declared it as New France. And the British were on the New York side of the lake. So the lake was used for the fur trade. So anybody who controlled the lake really controlled the fur trade. So because the French were in New England, there were tribes other than Western Abenaki that were part of New England and Canada. And those were part of the Abenaki Confederacy. So the tribes of the First Light. So the First Light people, those confederacy, that Abenaki Confederacy is made up of the Abenaki, the Passamaquoddy, the Penobscots, the Mi'kmaq, and the Wolastoqs, or the Maliseet people. So they were part of the French territories, and we all lived in those areas. Where the Iroquois Confederacy, which made up Oneida, Onondaga, all of the Mohawk people over in New York, they're the Six Nations Confederacy. And there's a little known confederacy that Abenaki are the only ones that are in both. It's called the Seven Nations of Canada. And that was formed during the war, the French and Indian War. And the reason why this is important is because as the Europeans started coming here and wanted fur, the Iroquois Confederacy started moving further and further from their homes and tried to take over Lake Champlain, which we call Bitabak, which means the waters between us and them. Bitabak means the waters between. So as they started to encroach on the lake and our territory, we needed help because we were in the very southern part of the Abenaki Confederacy territory. So we went to Quebec City, where the headquarters of the French was, and we had a big council fire at Ganawage, which is about 18 miles south of Montreal, to try to deal with we call it the Iroquois menace at the time, because they were trying to take over our territory. So who do you think we solicited to come down to help us? Samuel D. Champlain. He was the governor at Quebec City at that point. So he wanted to come down. We went up to ask for help because they had fire sticks or arquebus, which are the flintlock type weapons, to help us in our fight. So that way we would protect not only the French, but it would protect us, because if they overran us, they would be in Quebec City in no time. So it was in their best interest to work with us to help us. So Samuel D. Champlain was guided down the Rushlow River, and he got partway here with a whole bunch of troops, but he didn't run into any Iroquois resistance. So he sent most of his troops back, and he stayed with about 3 people. They came down the Rushlow River into Lake Champlain, and we met the Iroquois at Crown Point. Most people know where the Crown Point Bridge is. That was where the first battle took place between the Iroquois and the Abenaki people and the French. In our culture, we didn't just go to war because that was a thing that we just didn't do. So we each met at Crown Point, and we decided to fight in the morning. So we each went back and did our ceremonies and met on the battlefield in the morning. Well, when the battle started, the Champlain and his warriors, the three of them, killed a bunch of Iroquois leaders. So they fled. So, which gave us the first victory of the French and Indian Wars near Crown Point. So, because the Iroquois were afraid and they fled, the British were concerned that maybe the Abenaki would take over the lake and they wouldn't get any fur, right? So that's where they jumped in to help the Iroquois Confederacy against the Wabanaki Confederacy, and where the French and Indian Wars came in. The difference with the French and the British looked at Native people as subjects, whereas in the British people looked at Abenaki as a partner. They actually intermarried with us. They lived among our people. They treated us sort of like subjects, but they wanted to learn our ways. So they also Christianized many of our people, the Jesuits. The first mission in Vermont was actually in the Coas Meadow, the Coas County. It was called Mission de Loups, which means Mission of the Wolves. And that was in the early 1700s. And then the second mission was Missisquoi, most people know in Swanton, and then also Odanak and Ganawage up in Canada. The reason I'm telling you this is that as the French and Indian War started, a lot of the Native people listened to the French because they seemed to be immune to the sickness, because they had, antibodies, immunity to some of the smallpox and some of those. So we thought they had great power. So if you ever want to watch a movie about this, it's called like the Black Robe. If anybody hasn't seen the Black Robe, it's about the Iroquois coming into, and they basically almost wiped out the Huron, because the Jesuits told them to turn the other cheek and do not fight, because it's you shall not kill, right? And the Iroquois come in and almost wiped out the Huron because they wouldn't fight, and they turned. After that, it was a little bit. We came to their aid as part of the Seven Nations of Canada, which are three Iroquois tribes: Algonquin, Huron, Abenaki. So they were also allied with the French, but they were on the front lines. That's the Seven Nations of Canada were the troops on the front lines, where the Wabanaki Confederacy were just part of the French territories, but they didn't always fight. So that's the difference between the Seven Nations of Canada and the Wabanaki Confederacy and the Iroquoian Confederacy of Six Nations, even though there was Iroquois in both, because there were some Iroquois that allied with the British, some allied with the French. You can see this today, like if you go to Akwesasne, if anybody is religious, they were in the Seven Nations of Canada, like St. Regis, because they were Christianized. Other people weren't, so they're not. They're in the Six Nations. That's how you can know if someone's a Six Nation Iroquois or Seven Nations Iroquoian, because of whether they're Christianized or not. That may not be as true today, but it was at least true back then. So that brings us down to, and the Dutch, they were in Lake George, and they used to sneak out the Hudson and down that way because they didn't have a big enough force, but they wanted to trade fur too. So they actually created things called wampum. Wampum is our form of money, and you might be able to see there's a wampum that's purple right here. It's on this on my catamount moccasins. Wampum is a like I said, made from a quahog shell, and it's very important to us. It's our form of money, and this is what it looks like from a. I know you probably can't see it, but it's let me back it up a little. Anyway, it's purple and white from a quahog shell. You see the purple and the white. So that was our form of money. That was why this was what made this so important, because purple is hard to get in the natural world. So this is about $6 a bead. And the bigger ones are like $13 a bead, because they have to hand make these. They can't do them from a machine. So the Dutch figured out how to do that. So they would trade us that wampum for furs, and then they would sneak out the back door down the Hudson. So that's the ancient historical makeup of Native people during the French and Indian War. Now we're going to come down a little bit to modern day. There's two Western Abenaki. There's Eastern Abenaki and Western Abenaki. We're both brothers and sisters. The Eastern Abenaki are the Penobscots and the Passamaquoddies, who are over on Maine. Because they are east of us, that's why they're the Eastern Abenaki. And we're the Western Abenaki because we are west of them, and we are more in Vermont. There are two tribes in Canada, Odanak and Woolanak, up on the St. Lawrence up near Troy River. And they have reserves up there because they get to keep their reserves because they fought with the French, so the French let them keep the reserves. When the French settled with the Brits, then they created the dividing line. They took ours away because we were their enemies. We were on the wrong side. So that's why we don't have reservations here. There are 4 recognized tribes in Vermont. Most people know the famous tribe in the 70s up through probably the early 2000s was the Missisquoi tribe, or the St. Francis Okokie Missisquoi, because Homer St. Francis was their chief, and he was as big as life, and April was his daughter, and they were pretty much a force. They were a force in the Native world, good and bad, whatever you want to take it. They were the ones that were outspoken for the Abenaki people. They were one of the largest tribes. They go from lower part of Canada down through the Alberg Swanton area down into as far as Colchester, almost into Burlington. Then you have Nullhegan, which is us. We're equally as big as Missisquoi. We go from about Richford over to Moosehead Lake in Maine, and down through to New Hampshire, but we're going to stop at the Vermont borders just to give you context. So we go from about Richford over to New Hampshire border, across Indian Stream, all the way down to about Thetford. And then we hang west and come over to Chittenden County, Burlington area, down to about Rutland. So we kind of have a backwards L. That's Nullhegan. The Coasuck of the Coos Meadows are only in Newberry Haverhill, which is Orange County. So they're pretty small. They're only 100 and something people. And then you have the El Nu, which is down south, and they make up the southern border. Now they control all of the southern borders now, but there used to be a federally recognized tribe that was in the southwestern part of the state called the Mohegan. Okay, the Stockbridge, Muncie, Mohegan. They call them the Stockbridge, Muncie because they're now in Stockbridge. So most people don't realize that the Iroquois did not come all the way over to the lake. There was Abenaki, which were in like Plattsburgh, Adirondacks. And we know that historically because Adirondack is a slang or a swear word to the Abenaki people. Adirondack and Mohawk means bark eater. They used to call us bark eaters because sometimes they would see us eating the inside of a white pine because there's a carbohydrate layer between the bark and the pine tree. And when you got really hungry, you could scrape that out and eat it because it has carbohydrates. Now, what it did to your fiber and digestive system, I have no idea. You probably wouldn't want to eat too much of it, but there was at least some nutritious value, and they would call us bark eaters because they thought we couldn't feed ourselves. So it was kind of like a dirty word, so we were in the Adirondacks, the Abenaki people. Then it was the Mohegan people, and then the Mohegan people. The Mohegan people know down in Connecticut as the Mohegan Sun, or down that way. And the Mohegan is the last of the Mohegans that you've seen, or not really the last of them, but they got moved out into the out west, into Wisconsin, I think now. And I'm trying not to bore you guys with all this history, but so you have the they still have the territory, but they moved out. So there's really not their territory, but they're still recognized as at one point they were here. There's one tribe in Vermont that is not recognized, which is the Nolka Deer Clan, which is somewhere in Thetford. That's the Nathan Pirro group. And then there's two in New Hampshire that are not recognized. Now, when I say recognized, people don't realize that only dogs, horses, and Indians have to have a pedigree in the United States. Think about that. Only dogs, horses, and Indians have to have pedigrees. If you were African American and you declare that you're African American, then you're automatically protected under the affirmative action, and you cannot be discriminated against. If you say you're gay or lesbian, you can't be discriminated against because that's your sexual orientation. If you say you're Indian, they say, let me see your status card, prove it. So I can declare all day long, and it doesn't mean anything unless I actually, the only way that you are classified an Indian is if you are a citizen of a state or federally recognized tribe. Wow, a lot of people leaving the meeting. Hopefully I didn't offend anybody. What I'm just saying is that we are the only people that have to carry a card in our wallet to say that we're actually Indian. And that's just federal law. So that's what we had to prove ourselves, and we gained state recognition in 2011 and 2012. And the next thing I did that so my grandmother would be proud of who she was. People don't realize that Vermont had a 1931 Sterilization Act where they could sterilize people if they thought they were undesirable, idiots, imbeciles, or didn't want them to breed. And UVM headed that eugenics survey. And my grandmother was listed on that survey, and I have all of her documentation. She changed it. She was born Lillian May. She got married as Pauline and died as Delia. She changed her name 3 times so she wouldn't be caught to be sterilized. So I got into all this because my grandmother didn't want to be anything to do with Native things because of what happened to her. And before my mother died, I wanted to make sure she was proud of who she was and that she could dance in a circle and be proud that she was Indian. So I went out and set to try to help prove our recognition. So we had to go in front of genealogists and historians and scholars and prove ourselves to the legislators that we actually did exist and we were still here. And we were able to prove that in 2011, and then we helped others in 2012. And then after that, we got tribal land up in Barton, the first land in 200 years. That's where our tribal headquarters is. Then we weren't allowed to have eagle feathers, so I sued the Department of Interior and Department of Justice and won a federal settlement agreement. So we have the same rights as a federal tribe to carry eagle feathers and practice our religion. And we passed many laws since then. I've helped with the state park signs, changing them into including Abenaki, getting our free hunting and fishing rights that we got this year, getting lots of access to land. If you look at our website, you'll see partnerships, you'll see all the access we have to lands, you'll find some of our culture. And we have a food sovereignty program that I work on. We work with 4 colleges. Bennington is coming on board. We work with Middlebury, UVM, and Sterling College, which it was cool because I was just elected on the board of trustees for the college. It was announced today, which was kind of a nice honor. And so not only do we work with them, we work with NOFA Vermont. So we grew over 700 pounds of squash that we for our citizens, and about 100 pounds of beans, 500 pounds or so of corn for cornmeal. And I just acquired a buffalo herd that we're going to be using for renewable meat sources. So yeah, I could go on and about all the things that we're doing, but you could kind of see on our website, AbenakiTribe.org. It's www.abenakitribe.org. You can kind of go there and look at all the things that we do. And yeah, I put an airport display up, a display of Abenaki things at the international airport. You can see some of those if you got a chance to go to the second floor. Go up there. There's not a lot of people in the airport right now, so it might be safer to go now than it is later. But we have a whole 22-foot display up there of different regalia and baskets and you name it. So I've been talking at you for about 30 minutes. So I think what I want to do is open it up to answer any questions that you want, so I don't bore you to death and you get what you might want to know. How's that? I don't know who's going to moderate that, if that's going to be Martha or if that's going to be someone else.
I can help with that. I'm not sure if I'm very good at that, but I'll do my.
Somebody raised their hand just a minute ago.
Yeah, I'm Ray.
Okay, Ray.
You keep referring to yourself as Indian.
Yep.
You don't find that abrasive or?
No, I think sometimes people are a little too PC sometimes. Legally, in law, federal law, we are an Indian. I have to have an Indian status card. The Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990s, in order to allow us to sell our wares. We are legally, in order to be an Indian, you have to be a federally or state recognized tribe. So in law, we are an Indian. So that's really, some people get bent out of shape because they're thinking that's a federal label that's slapped on them. But I'm just saying, if we're going on reality, that's fact. I mean, we are considered an Indian. Now, some people like it if we're called a Native American because we're native to the Americas, whatever that means. Canada, they go by First Nations people because that's the way the government refers to them. Aboriginal or more New Zealand and Australia. I think if you do it with a good heart, then I don't see how anybody can get upset, right? Because, I mean, even historically, just to answer, or just to even explain it, Europeans, we put ochre on our face and on our body to keep the mosquitoes out, but also be close to the earth, which dyed our skin red. So we were known to Europeans as red-skinned people because when they saw us, our skin was red. That's why the color of red is with us. Now, if somebody called me an effing redskin, well, I'd take offense to that. But if somebody historically was talking historically like you were red-skinned people, I can't take offense to that. That's historically accurate, right? So I think it's all about context and how you deliver your message. Does that help you at all?
How do you refer to yourself? As an Indian?
Don? I mean, I know I'm Indian. I know who I am. I've always known who I am. But if somebody asks me, like I will say that I'm Indian. But I mean, most of the time I'm Don or I'm Chief or I'm whatever. But I mean, it's just who I am. I don't need to tell people, you know what I mean? Unless people ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
I have a question, Don. This is Martha. How did you actually prove that you were Indian? What did you actually have to do?
Yeah, if you go to the Vermont state statutes and you take Title I, Chapter 23, which is Indian Native American people, there is a list of criteria that was set out that we had to prove. We had to be known by others as having our own government and have influence over our own people. We had to be known as being an Indian tribe. People recognize us as Indian. We had to have a kinship to one another through genealogy. So there's a whole list. There's about 8 or 9 things. So what I had to do is we had to compile that information that they were looking for including our genealogy, submit it to the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs, who hired 3 independent scholars, a historian, genealogist, and another scholar of history. And they had to go through our application and say, yes, they're really who they are. And then they had to give the recommendation to the commission. The commission then had to approve it, send it to the House, which had 2 hearings, public hearings, and then the whole House floor had to vote on it. Then it went to the Senate, same thing, two Senate meetings, and then the Senate had to vote. Then the AG had to sign off, and then the governor. So I was saying is, if we hadn't proven ourselves by now, then people can, go, how many others have to do that, right? So that's the process. So like I said, if you go to Vermont State Statutes, Title 1, Chapter 23, it gives you a whole list of what we had to do to achieve it.
Other questions?
Quite a process.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
I think a bunch of hands raised.
This is Heather in Huntington, and thank you so much for your presentation. It was lovely to hear some of your songs and some of the language, and I was wondering what the status of the language was. I'd actually heard the other day about some of the naming of I think wildlife management areas and state parks, and some of the names that we know, like I think skunk and maybe moose are part of the language. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the status of the language.
Yes, thanks for asking that. Because when I got involved, there was 10 fluent speakers in the world that spoke Western Abenaki. And most of those were elders, and a lot of them were in Canada, except for a few down here, and they were getting older. So one of my citizens by the name of Jesse Bruchak, he went and lived with one of those elders for 3 years and immersed himself in the language, and that's all they spoke. And then when he came, and then he started mentoring with her son, who just passed on recently in his 80s. Jesse, mind you, is probably 40 something, right? So he was kind of like mentored after she had passed by her son. So Jesse, his 2 kids, until they were 5 years old, spoke nothing but the Abenaki language. And then when he was having them to go to school, he had to teach them English. So he immersed them in our language. So he actually was teaching it on his own, but it's kind of tough to try to teach. So about 2 years ago, I approached Middlebury College, who has an internationally known language program, and got them to agree to teach our language, to give us the resources to teach it. So there is a 2-week immersion class every year in the summer to teach our language. Last year was our first pilot program. We had 20 people there, and there are more people every year starting to learn. And he teaches classes there and also the University of Southern Maine to help the Penobscots, because we speak the same language, to help them as well. So we're gaining ground. So we probably have, 15, semi-fluent speakers now, and we're growing. And we have dictionaries now that in our language, and so it's starting to come back, and that's why we want to start acknowledging us, and we want to and try to get the signs changed so people can start making sure it doesn't go extinct.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Other questions?
I have a question. Hey, I'm Sage.
Okay.
I'm curious how, what are some of the, in addition to the language, what are some of the major, changes that your culture has undergone, coming into modern day? What have you held on to? And I guess also, how do you see that projecting into the future with this program and all of that?
Well, the only thing you truly have are your culture, your traditions, and your language. Everything else can be given or taken away, right? Like your recognition status can be taken away at a drop of a hat. Your position, your land, or anything else we know can be given or taken away. So our goal is to preserve our culture, our language, and our traditions. Now, because a lot of people hid and didn't, we had very small pockets of people who remembered things. So we had to take a concerted effort, which was good. The recognition process was bad in a way that we actually had to go through it, but it made us do an exercise to reach out to all families to figure out what did they know about our culture, what did they remember. Like the old Vermonter, they will tell you, like, putting fish eyes under your tongue when you're ice fishing. That's a native tradition, which most people don't know, but old Vermonters used to do it just so they could keep them warm before they were fishing with them. I mean, that sounds gross, but it is what it is. I'm just saying is that there's old traditions that still carry through that people remembered. And same with our gardens. So I think regaining a lot of that cultural knowledge has been both rewarding but a struggle. And I think moving into the future, it's keeping the biggest struggle we have is keeping our children interested in the culture, because without children and without citizens, then you become that extinct, right? You can't just self-declare. You have to have a functioning tribe, a functioning government. And as soon as it's not, the government takes it away again and takes all your assets. So, our big thing is keeping kids involved. Kids start out great. They like to drum, but then they start finding out what boys and girls are. And then they start like moving away because they want to date or go on, and kind of not hang out with us old folks. They want to go have fun with their friends. And then you see them start to trickle back when they start having kids of their own, because they want their kids to have the same experience that they did. Or when people are retired, they want to get back involved with the community because they have more time. So I think land, food sovereignty, there's a whole bunch of issues, health disparities that we have to work on. Does that answer your question, Sage?
Yeah, definitely. Just a follow up, I guess I'm curious too, would you be willing to share some of the traditions that you hold on to now? And yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, we have, we do pipe ceremonies. That's part of our culture. We do porcupine quill work. If you notice, this is all porcupine quill. This is not beaded. It's porcupine quill, dyed porcupine quill. That was what we had before we did beads. So we continue that artistic work. We still do our baskets from a cultural standpoint, but it's the way we look at things. Like for instance, I do this with students that I have. Say you have a bean in your hand, right? I ask people, well, what do you see when you're looking at a corn bean or corn, right? They say, well, it's life, it's food, it's this and that. And we say, yes, absolutely. That is all of that. But at some point, our creator had to give a finite amount of seeds to our people to be able to grow the food. They had to plant that, weed it, harvest it, store it all year so that way the critters didn't get to it. And they had to do this over and over and over throughout their lifetime and then hand it to others to do that. So when I look at it, when I'm touching a seed, not only am I touching creation itself, which was given to us by the creator, a gift, but I'm touching thousands of my ancestors who had to care for that seed until I had it in my hand. Because if any one of those people would have thrown it away, it would have been lost forever throughout time. So I tell our kids, what would you do with this? Would you hand it to somebody who would plant it? Or would you plant it yourself, or would you throw it away and break that chain of custody? Are you going to be the one responsible for not carrying it to the next generation? I mean, so we look at those things as three-dimensional. We don't look at just a seed. We look at everything in a three-dimensional kind of way, and our way of being in this world, and we're place-based people. We look at, up, down, and sideways. So I do a lot of spiritual work too. So, I mean, that's could be another time, but I mean, there's a lot of things like that we, how we view the world and how we view ourselves. So.
We have another question in the chat from Lucille. How did you become chief?
I was elected, actually. The way it works in our society is that, remember I told you we were nomadic people and we were led by different families. There was, multiple families. Well, and most heads of the family are part of the tribal council, as you would know it, or our tribal government. So they make decisions for their family. And if they don't like the decision, they take their family and leave, right? So like you might have a grandfather that's really respected and he spoke for your family. Or somebody might have somebody else that's respected and that spoke for your family. When there was a need, they would elect somebody to fill that need. And when that need was no longer required, then that would end, right? So Europeans, they needed somebody in the tribe to speak on behalf of that tribe or be the face of the tribe or be that person that was the interface between Europeans. So they would elect someone like myself who would negotiate with the federal, state, local people and be that, like what I am with you. I'm the interface between our tribe and you. So they elected me to do that position in 2010. And I will be in that position until I step down or they feel that I'm no longer needed or I'm not doing a good job, and then they'll replace me. There's no set time limit. Just like a war chief, you've heard war chiefs, right? Like there's a war chiefs. So if there was a war, they would elect someone else to lead the warriors into battle that was pretty good at warfare. And then when the war was over, then they would assimilate them back into the tribe and not call upon them until they need them again or pick somebody else. So in our society, it is an appointed position because there's a need, and you stay there as long as they need you. And I've been doing a good job, so they decided to keep me around doing that. So that's how I became chief, and I will be chief until they no longer need me, or I can't do it anymore.
Other questions?
Yes, this is Jeff. Thanks Don for the songs and the stories and the history. It was wonderful. Borders, whether it's a state border or international border, are kind of arbitrary lines in the earth. How do they impact your people today, and how do you manage a group of people that historically didn't have those borders as constraints?
Well, they impact us tremendously. I mean, we don't recognize borders from a tribal sovereignty point. Like I said, our territory goes from, like I said, Richford over all the way down, like I explained, but the state doesn't recognize those borders, but other native tribes, we do, right? Like they recognize my borders and we recognize theirs. So anything happens from a native standpoint within those geographical locations, then we deal with it and we help others, right? So the borders between here and Canada, we used to go walk freely with the Jay Treaty. But the Patriot Act from 9/11 closed our borders off and took away our treaty rights. They say they didn't take them away, but the only way you can cross the border is with a valid passport. Well, that's a European document, and not everybody has a valid passport. My mother didn't even have a driver's license, for God's sakes. So, I mean, you can't freely move across the borders without an approved European passport. So that hinders us tremendously. We're recognized in Vermont, but we're not technically recognized in New Hampshire, even though that's our territory. I mean, they recognize us as a Vermont tribe, but they don't recognize us as being part of New Hampshire as well. So it hinders us tremendously. And I'll give you an example with this COVID thing. I got COVID funds to help our citizens with some food cards, but they were only for Vermont residents. I couldn't give them to the guys that were just on the other side of the border. So his brother, one brother got food cards to help him and the other one didn't. So that causes a lot of division. Like, why did you get it and I don't? Because it wasn't because of us. It was a European constraint. So, I mean, when you have to live by the power of the victors, right?
Yeah.
People hate to hear that, but we live in a European society. We don't have the voting bloc to do anything about it. So we have to live under the rules of Europeans. But ultimately, we all care about this land. I mean, most of us are veterans. A lot of us are. We fought for this country for our own reasons, but we still fought because it's our land and we want to be free. So anyway, so there's it hinders us tremendously.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Other questions? I have.
This is Ray. This is Ray again. I didn't want to take over too much of your time, but I found it interesting because one of my cousins up in Canada did the family tree, and 10 generations back, or 10 or 11, I had a great grandfather who came from Lyon in France to Trois-Rivières. He was appointed the judge in Trois-Rivières, Canada, by Champlain. And he dealt with furs, but he married an Algonquin squaw. So back 11 generations. I was just wondering how much land that allows me to own in Canada.
None. And probably if you said squaw up there, they'd probably run you out of town because that's really an insult to Native people. It's kind of a Native version of whore, basically, because Europeans used to pass Native women around, and they would call them squaws, and that was kind of their way of referring to them. I'm just telling you that for educational purposes.
Yeah.
But the Canada, they have a lot of different rules, and Canada has their own rules, and we have ours. In the U.S. has their rules, and Canada has their rules. It's kind of weird because in the United States, if you're a citizen of a federal or state recognized tribe, then you are actually a Native person. You know, in Canada, you have to actually individually apply to the federal government in Canada in order to become a status Indian, regardless of your tribal affiliation. So it's really, really screwy. They don't even recognize really tribes. They do, but the only way you become an Indian is through a federal process individually, where down here it's done through tribes, and anybody under that tribe is a citizen. It's just weird. I mean, so like I said, it's kind of, like I said, we know who we are. We were Indian before recognition. We're Indian after. So to us, it just gives us a way to help our kids and to compete on a level that gives us more access to resources. So I don't.
Thank you for explaining squaw to me, though.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, that's a misconception. Most people don't realize it. And I'm not offended. I'm just doing it because you didn't call me one. I'm just saying is that, it's just, that is a stereotypical term that was used by Europeans way back then. And if you watch the old movies and they're out at the trading post, what are they doing to the poor Indian women? The guys come in, they rape her, throw her in a corner, pay the barkeep, and move on. And that's basically how the term squaw came about.
The documents I got from my cousin actually call her a savage.
Right.
It's in French, but.
Yep, mine too. I have plenty of documents that call us savages or those kind of things, because that's the way they looked at us, that we were uncivilized, that we were savages.
Yeah.
And to come and to kind of give you another history thing is that scalping started with Europeans. That didn't start with Native people.
Right.
Because they used to give $10 for every scalp that you brought back to them to show that you killed an Indian. And the only way you could prove it is by taking a lock of their hair, because you would have to be dead in order to get a lock of somebody's hair. So they would pay $10 a scalp. And since they started doing it to Native people said, well, how do you like it? We'll do it back to you. It actually started, that was a European thing that was done so they could get a bounty on showing that they killed an Indian. A lot of history.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, no worries, Ray.
One more question from Martha. What are you working on with the state legislature at this point?
Right now, I'm working on, as we just got our hunting and fishing rights, I'm working on tax exemption for our tribal land. Churches and others have tax exemption, and we don't. So it would be nice if we could have, since it was we were stewards of the land originally, it would be nice if we don't have to pay taxes on land that we already had at one point. So, and we're only talking the tribal lands, not individuals. We're talking just tribally owned lands. So I'm working on that. I'm working on trying to get our big game tags. I don't know how that'll go. And just a few items like that, just to continue to help us move forward. I mean, we don't have anybody with full-time positions. It'd be nice if we were able to do that so we could be a resource all the time. We don't have the backing like the NAACP and others have. It's great that they have that, but we don't. And so we get further and further behind. And so, we're working on things like that, food security, whatever we can. Kind of tough. If you've ever done politics and you've ever done legislative things, it's very tough.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I am looking at the things on your wall and so much culture and traditions. I'm astounded. It's not really a question, it's a statement. That so much could be carried down when there was such a push to eradicate anything that was Indian, any knowledge or culture that was Indian over time. How did you do it?
Well, see, you have to understand that Native culture and our belief system never goes away. It just becomes lost until you find it again, right? Just like the language, thank God some of the Jesuits recorded some of it, or we had some old fluent speakers, because it really was never gone. It was just lost until recovered. So, I mean, we have elders that have helped us that, and you'll know someone who is, if they have spiritual teachings, they should be able to name their elders, like where they got those teachings from. Like my elder was Thomas Beck, who learned from Eldon de Dan, who learned from Albert Ward, who learned from Albert Lightning. That goes back how many generations? I can name every teacher that I learned my things from. Now, if somebody is a spiritual person, or they say like they call themselves shaman or whatever you ask them who their elders are. And if they can't name them, well, then there you go, right? So I'm just saying is that part of our culture is passed down information. And some of it, because the Penobscots are our relatives, we're close. They're Eastern Abenaki, we're Western. There was still culture there that we could pull from as well as our own. There was historical writings and books. There was also our brothers and sisters up in Odanak and Wolanak who've had reservations since the French and Indian War. So I mean, we had to pull it back. But Vermont has unique traditions that sometimes our other brothers and sisters don't. That's how we were distinguished as our own culture down here, our own tribe, that we weren't part of somebody else. We had our own culture and way of being, even though we had a lot of similarities. So that's how we had to gain it back. Like sweetgrass, that's our medicine. It grows all over. It's for mind, body, and spirit. Europeans call it vanilla grass. We smudge ourselves with it. And if it doesn't burn evenly, then either your mind or your body or your spirit's out of whack. You got to figure out which one is out of whack. There's all kinds of things like snowshoes. If you find red tufts on the outside of a snowshoe, those were Abenaki because we wanted to be close to the earth. So we're the only ones that had red tufts. There's a whole bunch. We got war clubs, root ball war clubs. I've got a lot of things. Just it's part of I have my chief cape way back there with eagle feathers on it. So anyway, it's hard to explain. It's just there, right? It's It's hard to explain. You get it from everywhere, and some of it comes just for being who you are. It's hard to explain.
Thank you.
Yep.
So does that mean that there's no, that you're teaching one-on-one kind of, to carry on the tradition, or do you ever get together and do teachings for?
We do. We have apprentices that we teach, and we also that people who have a certain knack for things or want to do things. Like we have somebody that like wants to make drums, so we pair them up with a drum maker to learn how to do that. Some people want to learn how to do a birch bark canoe. I mean, those aren't just things that you can just pop out of the air. You have to learn how to do those things. The same with the language. Jesse is the one who's mentoring the language. So we do that, but we also do collective. We meet once a month, or at least we did before COVID, and we did ceremonies. Like there's only in our tribe there are only 3 pipe carriers that have the right and been through the ceremonies to carry a pipe for the people. Everybody else are personal pipe keepers. So you have to go through a lot of teaching and learning on how to carry a pipe, and so you don't hurt anybody, and that you actually do the ceremonies right, and that you're doing it based on ancient traditions. So it carries that connection of your ancestors through us to the next generation. So there's a combination of both. There's apprentices, and then there are people who do it in a wider fashion, as a group.
How many people are in your tribe?
I have about 1,500 on the rolls, but a lot more that could be. But I'd say somewhere around 1,500. And that's about the same as Missisquoi. We got about 4,000 in the state, maybe total. That's on tribal rolls, but there's a lot more people that could be. They just don't want to. A lot more people that could be. They just don't want to. It's kind of strange because kind of feedback from I don't know. You have your.
Try turning this on.
Anyway. I'm getting feedback. There you go. Thanks, Tom. So I forgot what we were talking about because I was trying to worry about the
The number in your tribe.
What's that?
The numbers in your tribe.
Oh yeah. Like for instance, my mother had 11 brothers and sisters, and probably 6 of them are on the tribe. The rest of them don't want to. It's because we mix with French. So you wouldn't know if I was Indian unless I told you, right? Because I look as white as you are, right? You wouldn't even know it unless I told you. So I've had people say, why not take advantage of white privilege? Because once I declare myself as an Indian, you become a target and you're somehow less than somebody else and you're disadvantaged. That's the only thing that we have the advantage of being able to do is pass as somebody else, because that's why my ancestors were able to hide from the eugenics survey and not worry about it, because, until they were found out. But, white Europeans have a certain privilege, regardless if people want to acknowledge it or not. And some of our people would rather take advantage of that and deny their heritage or not acknowledge their heritage than to say, I'm Native. And the first thing they're saying, oh yeah, prove it. You're not really Indian. Let me see your card. But it's like, anyway, we don't want to go down that road. But I'm just saying is that people take advantage of, they don't want to bother with all of the stuff that comes with being disadvantaged population, which is sad because that's how you go extinct, right? I mean, anyway.
Tom Northrup had his hand up. Tom, are you still there?
Actually, this is Meg with Tom here. The question that I have is really way too broad to ask at this point in time, but when you talk about the eugenics survey and the disaffiliation that people have and not knowing how you know what you know, just knowing it, there's all this collective trauma there that I encountered in a number of decades as a social worker in Vermont, where people really didn't have any way of affiliating. And I'm just wondering, what is the there are all these efforts to connect with language and tradition that you're doing. Are there, in a nutshell, are there efforts to deal with the mental health fallout that the community has experienced over all of those years?
I would say only on an individual. You mind muting for a minute, please?
Oh, yeah, just have to figure out where it is. There it is. Okay.
It's just the feedback. So in a collective sense, no. On individual terms, yes. Collectively, we do our ceremonies, and and when I say we don't know, we just know. I mean, we grew up around just because my grandmother avoided trying to be Indian, she still did Indian things, right? I mean, because you can't just take that away from what you've learned or how you've been around, right? So you still learn things by being around people and their mannerisms, and then sometimes later you find out, oh, that was Abenaki, because somebody else is doing the same thing, or like I said, the fish eyes under the tongue, right, or something like that, right? It's like, all of a sudden you find that in a historical book that's what Abenaki people did, and you're like, oh, okay, that's where that came from, and then you piece it together, right? And then you find other people doing it, so you learn from elders that know already, that are willing, that have been part of that culture, but you also start piecing things together, and you inherently find out through research and historical things that was a native practice, and it was an Abenaki practice. So, I mean, that's how you learn. I think with us, even though there was trauma, we look at ourselves as survivors, not as victims. And that really helps, because we survived. My grandmother might have been a victim because she had to change her name and she was directly affected. But because she survived and wasn't sterilized, then we became survivors of that, right? So when you look at yourself as a victim, you somehow become less than somebody else, and you're always somehow, I don't even know how to put it, but you look at it in a different light than if you were a survivor. It's sort of like what the Auschwitz, like the Holocaust. They never call themselves victims; they call themselves survivors of the Holocaust, right? It's because you're putting yourself on a thing that this was bad, this was done to us, and we don't want it to happen again. But if you stay in that mode that I'm a victim, you owe us, and somehow I am less than you are because I am now broken, I think we teach that inner strength, that inner separation, and the mindset of being compartmentalizing it almost, and then having to deal with it, right? As I could explain it a little more later, but I mean, it's a way of doing things. And you're a social worker, or mental health worker, so you understand what like the inner child is, where somebody disassociates from the trauma that they are, and they protect that little thing, and and that's their core, and then they sometimes turn into multiple things. but we have a thing called the warrior self, that like it's not natural to kill someone, it's not natural to do certain things. So we do our ceremonies to bring out that warrior self, to do the things that we normally wouldn't do. And then when we're done that, say, warfare, we take our pain off, we strip that away, do our ceremonies, put that back in, and bring ourselves back out. So then we say we're good people, but that warrior self, he's got some issues. We got to fix him. We got to take care of him. So you know how like kids always want to blame their parents for their problems? It's like, it's never their fault. It's always their parent. So it's a way of saying, look, that's part of me, but I'm a good person. I'm a Christian. I don't kill. I treat people nice. This guy over here is the one who's doing all that damage. So we have to protect him, fix him, and heal him. So you compartmentalize that in order to take care of that trauma, if that makes sense. Not to get too philosophical, too into it, but we call it a warrior self. Lakota call it shadow man. There's many names for it. So that's the way we deal with trauma through that ceremonial practice.
I don't see any other hands. Or Ray, is your hand still up, or you have another question? Oh, no, Kathy.
I'm sorry.
Kathy, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Hi, Don.
Hey.
So I just want to go back to something that, initially when you were talking about essentially, the shame and the fear that people carried, being stigmatized and essentially hunted and pursued for who they were as an identity. How then were you able to bring those people who were feeling hidden from who they actually were to the place where you are now, which you have a really open cultural presence? And how did that all feel? I'm trying to imagine how it would be that, so disassociated from your own identity. Okay, so I'll check out.
No, hard and a lot of work. See, one of the things, like I said, most people knew Abenaki is either dead, extinct, gone, not here anymore, or they looked at Homer, who was a guy who would just as well punch you in the face as to talk to you, because he stood up for his people, but he did it in a way that was a sledgehammer. So when you say you're Abenaki, oh, you're one of them. Oh, okay. The guy who drives around with their own license plates and. So when I'm not saying that at that time that maybe was what kept us in the forefront, right? Good or bad. We see how people who act bad keep themselves in the forefront, right? We've seen how that happens. But I guess my point being is that, not to take anything away from them, but one of the things I tried to do was bring integrity and pride to Native people. If I can show how you are supposed to live through ceremony, through my actions, through being a good person, that it makes others proud of who they are. And then as the social dynamics change, there was almost like a perfect storm that as social change started to happen, it became more acceptable to be Native. So if you take on and ride that wave, that you can say it's okay to be who you are and different, then not only are you providing a good example of what Native people and leaders could be, but also that it's okay to be different, right? And we see the social change that's been happening since the George Floyd thing, which has really helped African American. But we've also jumped on that to say it's okay for us to be who we are too. We don't have to hide as white people or say that we're not Indian. We can be proud of who we are, and then make it okay for our kids. We still have hate mongers out there. Don't get me wrong. There are still people out there that really hate us and try to deny our existence. But I talk to them and say, we went through a European process to prove who we are. Nobody else has to do that. All they have to do is self-declare. So it's not easy being Indian. It's not easy taking on this responsibility and doing all these things. But if we don't do it, who will for our children, right? Who will? So that's what has motivated, and we've come a long way. We've accomplished a lot, but it's because of hard work and perseverance and making partnerships, and educating, right? Because people fear things that they don't understand, right? So if we can replace ignorance with education, then maybe people won't fear us, and then maybe we'll become more accepted. And as we become more accepted, our kids can say, hey, I'm Native. And kids, instead of saying, oh, you're a river rat, they might say, hey, that's cool. Yeah, I am too. Or something, you know what I mean? It's about changing mindsets. Anybody else? I think Martha's on mute.
I'm yelling at Susan. Susan has a question. You want to unmute, Susan? You're muted, Susan.
There we go.
There you go.
How can non-Native people support Native peoples?
Be kind. I mean, just help us when you can, whether it be moral support, whether it be if there's ways to find ways to uplift our people. We are at a health disparities and disadvantage, so we are far behind many others. So I would say anything that people can do that would help give us a hand up, not a handout kind of thing, because we're proud just like everybody else, but we live off from, we don't get paid to do this, right? So I'm just saying is help in any way that you can, whether it be through education, whether it's making opportunities for people, or just saying, hey, change the society, that they're not all bad, they're not all dead, they're still here. And whatever way you can, right? I mean, there's no magic bullet. It's just being kind to each other, right? It's just being good neighbors.
Thank you.
Other questions? To the Northrops. Oh, Martha McSherry, do you have a question?
There's an unknown that raised their hand.
Unknown, I'm sorry, unknown next to McSherry. I'm sorry, unknown next to McSherry. Who has a question? Unknown? Sorry, I can't, don't know who you are. Anyone else?
Well, I guess does anybody else have anything? If not, I will teach you a goodbye in Abenaki. You remember the song to say hello, which is Kwano Day, or Kwe means greeting. But if you say, I'm going to run you through this, adio. So you guys can do it as well. Adio. Nana, right? Like Nana, like a Nana, right? So adio, Nana. Walmazi. That means goodbye. Take care until I see you again. And we say Oli Bumkani, which means, back in the old days it meant paddle well, but we use it as travel well. So I'd say adio, Nana Walmazi, Oli Bumkani. That means goodbye until I see you again. Take care until I see you again. Travel well. And that's what that means. So you get to learn a little bit about, maybe even if you say audio, that means goodbye. You at least learned one thing that you didn't know before.
How do you say thank you?
What?
How do you say thank you?
Oni oni.
Oni, oni.
Oni oni. Some say, like the Penobscots will say willy winny, but it's that's an Eastern Abenaki. Western is oli oni. So oli oni or willy winny.
Leonito.
Yes. Oli oni. Now, I'm not fluent by any means, but I struggle like everybody else, but we do our best. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
I hope you got what you were looking for. I mean, it's always hard to judge, and it's hard when I'm talking at somebody for a long time. but I hope you got something out of it, and it was a pleasure spending time with you. I wish my sister could have seen it, but maybe another time. So anyway, adio, nanawamazi, olibamkani.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. That
Nice
was
seeing
great.
you, Kathy.
Thank you.